I have been a high school history teacher for 31 years. I have taught the same chapters about the same wars to several thousand teenagers who mostly did not want to be there, and I learned early on that the only way to make anyone care about the past is to make them feel the weight of it. Every mistake has a cost. Every choice leaves a mark. I thought I understood that better than most people. I did not expect to have to apply it to my own house. My name is Eugene Calloway. I am 63 years old. I live in a two-bedroom house on Birchwood Drive in Lansing, Michigan, which I have owned since 1998 and which has needed more repairs than I ever budgeted for and which I love unreasonably anyway. I have two children. My son is 34. My daughter is 31. They are, by most visible measures, functional adults with jobs and apartments, and the specific busy energy of people who are always in the middle of something more pressing than a phone call to their father. I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer in February, stage 2, which the oncologist, a trim woman named Dr. Vasquez, explained with the particular calm of someone who delivers bad news many times a week and has learned that calm is the kindest thing she can offer. She said the prognosis was good. She said we caught it at the right time. She said the surgery would be followed by a course of chemotherapy, 8 rounds, 1 every 2 weeks, and that most patients managed it better than they expected. I nodded the way you nod when someone is telling you something your brain has not fully agreed to receive yet. I drove myself home from that appointment. It was a Tuesday in February, gray and flat the way February in Michigan tends to be, the kind of day that doesn't seem to understand it's supposed to have weather. I sat in my car in the driveway for about 10 minutes before I went inside. I made a sandwich. I sat at the kitchen table. I thought about the fact that I had just been told I had cancer and that the person I had told first was a parking attendant who had not asked. I called my son that evening. He picked up on the 4th ring, which meant he was not expecting me. I could hear his wife in the background asking something in the television in the particular acoustic texture of a house that is full of its own life. I told him. He said, "Dad, oh wow, okay, what do the doctors say?" I told him what Dr. Vasquez had told me. He said that sounded really positive, which is the right thing to say. And then he said he needed to let his wife know and he would call me back. He called back 40 minutes later. He said he and his wife were thinking positive thoughts and to let him know if I needed anything. I said I would. I thanked him. We hung up. My daughter called me the next morning. She had talked to her brother. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she is managing her feelings in real time, bright and a little too fast. She said she had been reading about it. Stage 2 had great outcomes. There were forums online with people who had been completely fine. She had sent me a link. I told her I had already done some reading. She said she wanted to come visit soon. Work had been impossible lately, but she was going to figure it out. She said she loved me and she would be in touch. I want to be clear about what I am describing here because I think precision matters. Neither of my children said anything wrong. They said all the correct things. They used the right words in the right order and they expressed the appropriate concern, and they meant it. I believe they genuinely meant it. I am not saying they did not love me. I am saying that love without presence is a theory, and I was about to spend a great deal of time needing more than a theory. The surgery was scheduled for March 15th. I gave both of my children 6 weeks of notice. 6 weeks is a long time. A semester in my classroom is 15 weeks, and in 15 weeks I can teach a student the entire arc of a world war, including causes, major engagements, and lasting consequences. 6 weeks is enough time to request a day off, book a flight from Columbus where my son lives, drive the 4 hours from Indianapolis where my daughter lives, make a plan, make a backup plan, arrange a dog sitter, arrange child care. Do any of the 100 logistical things that people do when something matters enough to make them move. In the 6 weeks between my diagnosis and my surgery, my son called me 3 times. My daughter called me 4 times and sent 7 texts, most of which were links to articles. One of them is about the importance of maintaining a positive mindset during cancer treatment, which I read in full and found less useful than she intended it to be. I understood what she was trying to do. I read the article anyway. The morning of March 15th, I was up at 5:30. I could not sleep. I made coffee. I wasn't supposed to drink and then remembered I wasn't supposed to drink it and poured it out and stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard. There was still snow on the ground, the old hard kind that doesn't melt until April, and the yard had that clean, still look that makes winter feel almost intentional. I had a bird feeder out there that I had filled the week before. A pair of chickadees were working through the seeds with focused, cheerful efficiency, entirely unconcerned with my situation, which I found oddly comforting. I want to tell you something I have not told anyone. Not my doctor, not my neighbor Frank, who has been a friend for 20 years, not either of my children. Standing at that window at 5:30 in the morning with a cup of coffee I couldn't drink, I thought about my wife. She passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer. I was with her for every appointment, every infusion, every night she couldn't sleep. I slept in the recliner in her hospital room for 9 days. I'm not saying this to compare situations. I am saying it because standing there in the kitchen that morning, I thought about her, and I thought about what it means to show up for someone, and I thought, very specifically and clearly, about the fact that no one was going to show up for me today, and I was going to have to carry that quietly the way I had learned to carry most things. Then I called a cab. Welcome to Dad's True Revenge. Stay with me, because this one goes somewhere. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe. I promise you'll want to be here for what comes next. The surgery was 4.5 hours. I know this because I was told afterward. I was not present for it in any meaningful sense. I woke up in a recovery room with a nurse named Anthony leaning over me saying my name in that careful, measuring way that nurses do when they are checking whether you are all the way back. I told him I was awake. He said, "Good, that was good. The surgery went well. Dr. Vasquez would come talk to me." I asked if anyone had called. He checked a chart. He said he didn't see any messages. I told him that was fine. They kept me for 8 days. Post-surgical observation, they said, and then a complication. Nothing severe, but enough to extend the stay. Something with my blood pressure that required adjustment and monitoring. 8 days is a long time to be in a hospital room, long enough to become familiar with the ceiling in a way you never intended. Long enough to learn the shift schedule of every nurse on the floor. Long enough to watch the chair beside your bed remain empty until you stop looking at it directly and start just knowing it in your peripheral vision, the way you know a bruise without touching it. My son called on day 1, day 3, and day 6. Day 1, he asked how I was feeling. I said groggy. He said that was expected. There was a pause, and then he mentioned that he had been looking at flights just to see, but the prices were really something this time of year, and with the kids' spring break coming up, he said he would keep looking. He said keep us posted. I said I would. Day 3, he asked if there was anything I needed. I said I didn't think so. He said, "Okay, good, that was really encouraging." Day 6, he called in the evening and asked whether I had given any thought to what I was going to do about the house when I started chemo, because apparently it could get intense and it might make sense to think through the logistics. I told him my neighbor Frank had already offered to help. He said that was great. Frank was a good guy. Tell him he said hi. My daughter called every day for the first 5 days. She is a better caller than her brother, I will give her that. Each call lasted about 6 minutes. Each call contained some version of the same progression. "How are you feeling? That's so good to hear. Things at work have been absolutely brutal. I have been thinking about coming. I really have. I just need to find the right window." On day 3, she told me she had looked at taking personal leave, but it was a bad time with a project she was leading. On day 4, she told me she had talked to her manager and he was being completely unreasonable. On day 5, she told me she was definitely going to figure something out for next week. On day 6, she did not call. On day 7, she sent a text that said, "Dad, so sorry I've been quiet. Things have been crazy. How are you feeling?" I read the text. I set my phone down on the bedside table. Outside my window, the Lansing sky was doing the slow gray work of a Michigan March. I thought about that word, crazy. I thought about how often people use that word to describe ordinary life, as a way of explaining why ordinary life has prevented them from doing something. I thought about my students, 31 years of them, and how I had tried to teach them that every moment is a choice, and every choice has a cost, and that history does not forgive you for what you meant to do. I picked my phone back up. I wrote back, feeling better. "Thanks for checking in," and that was true, both parts of it. On day 6, a nurse named Paulette came in to check my vitals during the evening shift. She was a woman in her mid-40s with a competence about her that I recognized as the earned kind, the kind that comes from years of working hard in difficult conditions. She checked my blood pressure, noted something on her tablet, asked how my pain level was. Then she looked at the empty chair by the bed, the one with the blue vinyl seat, and she looked at me and she said, very carefully, like someone handling something they know is fragile, "Is there someone we should be calling? Family? A friend?" I told her my neighbor Frank knew I was here. She nodded. She said good. Before she left, she paused at the door and said, "You know, the call button is right there if you need anything at all. Just anything." She looked at me when she said it with the particular look of someone who has seen this before and has decided the most dignified thing she can offer is acknowledgement without pity. I thought about that look for the remaining 2 days of my hospital stay. I thought about it more than I thought about the surgery. On day 8, Dr. Vasquez discharged me with paperwork, a prescription, a follow-up appointment, and instructions I had already read twice online because I was a teacher and preparation was a reflex. A volunteer pushed me to the exit in a wheelchair, which is hospital policy, and which always strikes me as both considerate and faintly comic. The idea that a man who has just survived surgery is trusted to make medical decisions but not to walk 40 feet unassisted. I called a rideshare from the entrance. The driver was a college-aged kid named Marcus. Wait, no, the driver was a young man who asked if I'd had a good stay. I said, "Son, it's a hospital." He laughed and said, "Fair point." He helped me with my bag at the door and said, "Feel better, man," in the way young people say it. Quickly and genuinely, not quite knowing what else to say but meaning it anyway. My front door was exactly as I had left it 8 days ago. I stood on the porch for a moment with my bag and my paperwork, and the particular bone-deep exhaustion of a man whose body had been through something significant. The storm door had a crack in the lower panel I had been meaning to fix since November. The welcome mat needed replacing. The hanging planter my wife had put up 20 years ago was still there, empty since fall, waiting for whatever I remembered to put in it come May. I went inside. The house was exactly as I had left it. That is the kind of sentence that sounds simple. It is not simple. When you leave your house for 8 days because you were having surgery and you come back and the house is exactly as you left it, it means no one came. It means the mail stacked up in the box by the door because no one came. It means the plant on the kitchen windowsill was drier than it should have been because no one came. It means the small details of your life continued in your absence without witnesses, which is a different kind of alone than solitude. Solitude is chosen. This was not chosen. I had simply been absent and no one had come to hold the space. I set my bag down. I moved carefully to the kitchen, the way you move when you are still inside your own recovery, and your body is still negotiating terms. I put water on for tea. I stood at the window looking at the backyard. The bird feeder was still out there. The seeds were gone, long gone, and the chickadees had moved on to someone else's yard. I refilled it later that afternoon. I do not know why that felt important, but it did. I called my attorney 2 days after I got home. His name is Stuart Meeks. I have been working with Stuart for 18 years. Since I bought this house, since I wrote the first version of my will, since my wife died and I updated everything to account for a life that was now different from the one I had planned for. Stuart is a careful man. He speaks slowly and asks twice when he is not certain, and he does not waste words, which I have always found to be a quality that inspires trust in proportion to how rare it is. I told him what I needed. He listened without interrupting for a long time. Then he said, "Eugene, are you certain about this?" I told him I had been certain since day 6. He was quiet for a moment, the way he is when he is absorbing something and organizing his response. Then he said he would begin drafting the documents. I thanked him. We hung up. I finished my tea. Outside the window, the bird feeder was swinging slightly in the March wind, empty again already, and I made a note to get more seed. 8 weeks after my discharge, I invited my children to dinner. I want to be honest about what I was doing. I was not setting a trap in the way of a man who enjoys cruelty. I was doing what I had done for 31 years in a classroom. I was giving my students the opportunity to show me who they were, and I was going to remember the answer. I made pot roast, my wife's recipe, which is to say a recipe I know by feel more than by measurement, the kind of cooking that lives in your hands after enough years. I set the table. I put on some music, something from the 70s that my daughter used to make fun of when she was a teenager and now is probably quietly nostalgic for. I was, from all visible angles, a warm and grateful father who was simply glad to have his family around him during a difficult time. My son arrived first with a bottle of wine and the specific energy of a man who was performing reliability. He came through the door and hugged me longer than usual, and then his eyes moved around the house in the particular way that eyes move when they are gathering information while appearing to simply be looking. He said the place looked great. I told him I hadn't done anything to it. He said no, it just looked really good, well maintained. I told him I had always maintained it carefully. He nodded and said of course, and asked if I needed help with anything. My daughter arrived 20 minutes later with a store-bought pie and the controlled brightness of someone who has made a decision to be a good presence in this room and is honoring that decision effortfully. She hugged me for a long time. She smelled like the same perfume she has worn since college, which for 1 second made her 7 years old again in my mind and cost me something I did not expect. She sat down and began, with great care and architectural precision, to explain much. There was a project at work that had become a crisis. Her car had made a noise that turned out to be nothing but had seemed serious. She had actually driven partway and then gotten a cold. She had felt terrible about it. She used that phrase 3 times, felt terrible about it. She used that phrase 3 times, felt terrible about it. I listened to everything she said with the same patience I have applied to 31 years of students, explaining why the assignment wasn't done. I took in the information. I stored it accurately. I told her I understood completely. She exhaled. I passed the bread. At some point during the meal, I set down my fork and said, "You know, this whole experience got me thinking." I told them I had scheduled some time with Stuart to go over a few things, just to make sure everything was in order. It was good to be organized, I said, at my age with what had happened this spring. Just practical. Something moved at the table. You could feel it, a slight shift in atmospheric pressure, like the moment before weather changes. My son said that sounded very smart. My daughter said of course that was so responsible. I picked up my fork and said, "Who wants more pot roast?" And that was that. The following months had a rhythm I recognized. My son began calling every Sunday at 9 in the morning, regular as a class bell. He asked about my chemo, my appetite, my energy, my follow-up appointments. He asked good questions. He was attentive in a way that I had not known him to be in some years, and which I would have been grateful for. Genuinely, unreservedly, if the timing had been different. After 15 or 20 minutes of devoted attention, he would find a way, smoothly and naturally, to mention something related to the house or my finances. Nothing overt, just practical fatherly topics, the kind of thing a caring son would reasonably think about. Had I looked into long-term care insurance? Was I keeping up with the property taxes? Had I thought about what made sense with the investment account? My daughter began appearing on Saturdays with food. Real food. The considered kind, not the gesture kind. The specific brand of crackers I liked. The soup I had mentioned once in passing. She sat at the kitchen table while I underwent chemo and kept me company during the hours when I felt the worst, and the world had gone flat and colorless, and the best thing a person could offer was just to be there, which is exactly what she was. On those Saturdays I felt something unexpected. Not gratitude exactly, though I was grateful. Something older than that, and sadder. Something like grief for the 10 Saturdays in March and April when this person, who was right here, who was good company, who was capable of this kindness, had chosen something else instead. I drank my tea and talked with her about the grandchildren she didn't have yet, and the garden she was trying to start on her apartment balcony. And I was warm, always warm, because she was my daughter, and warmth was what I had to give her. My son drove up from Columbus in July. Stayed 2 nights. He helped me with some things around the house. Genuinely helpful things, not pretextual ones. He fixed the storm door crack I had been ignoring since November. We watched 2 baseball games and had a good time. Sitting on the porch on his second evening, talking about nothing in particular, I felt the full, complicated weight of loving someone who had failed you. It is not a simple feeling. It doesn't resolve cleanly into either forgiveness or resentment. It just sits there, heavy and familiar, the way long-carried things do. What I want you to understand is that I never told them. Not once in those months did I mention the hospital stay in a way that invited response. I did not leave silences that asked to be filled. I did not make a reference that hung in the air. I gave them nothing to defend against, nothing to explain themselves out of, nothing to apologize for. What had happened had happened. I had processed it alone, the way I had processed most difficult things in my life, in private, slowly, without performance. I didn't need an apology. I had been a teacher long enough to know that the only lesson worth giving was one the student arrived at themselves. Explanations are just noise. Consequences are the curriculum. It is October now. I am 8 months out from surgery, 4 months out from my last chemo infusion. Dr. Vasquez says the scans are clean, which she says in the same calm voice she uses for everything, and which I have learned to receive as the significant thing it is. I walk 2 miles every morning, which is more than I walked before all of this, which makes me think the whole experience has done me some structural good in spite of everything. I drink better coffee than I used to. I go to bed earlier. Small adjustments that add up. I went back to teaching in September, just one class, American History. Seniors, because I was not ready to be fully retired and because I was not done yet. I stood in front of 22 teenagers on the first day and told them that history was not a list of dates. It was a record of choices, and every choice had a consequence, and the consequence did not care whether you meant well. And this was, I told them, not depressing, but clarifying, because clarity was the most useful thing you could have in any situation. They stared at me the way teenagers stare at adults who are saying something they don't quite know how to disagree with. Stuart has the papers. He has had them since March, since I called him from my kitchen 2 days after coming home, still moving carefully, still feeling the specific vulnerability of a body that has been opened and closed. The will has 3 primary beneficiaries now. None of them are my children. The first is a cancer support organization in Lansing that provides transportation, meals, and in-home companionship for patients who are going through treatment without family support. I found them online during my 2nd week of chemo. I have since met the woman who runs it. Her name is Patricia. Her name is a woman I will simply call the director, because the name doesn't matter, and what she does matters enormously. The second is a scholarship fund at Lansing Community College for first-generation students studying education, because I have spent 31 years believing that a good teacher is one of the most important things a society can produce, and I want there to be more of them. The third is a small neighborhood land trust that preserves affordable housing in older neighborhoods like mine, because this house on Birchwood Drive was built in 1961 and has been a home to 4 families before mine. And I want it to remain a home for families who need it, not a transaction. My house goes to the estate to be liquidated for those same 3 purposes. Stuart knows. He is known since March. He is a careful and precise man, and he will handle everything exactly as I have laid it out. There's a letter in the file, 1 page, typed in the 12-point font I have used on every document of consequence in my adult life. It is addressed to my son and my daughter. It says, by the time you read this, I imagine you will have questions. I want to answer the one that matters most, because I was a history teacher and I believe in accurate information. I was in the hospital for 8 days following my surgery on March 15th. I came home in a rideshare. I called from the hospital entrance. I had given you both 6 weeks of notice. I am not writing this with anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger is what you feel before you understand something. I understood something, and it changed me in a way that did not require anger. What I learned in room 214 of Sparrow Hospital is that showing up is not a grand gesture. It is not a sacrifice or a performance or a thing that requires the right circumstances and the alignment of schedules. It is just a choice. And choices, as I told my students every year for 31 years, are the only thing history actually records. I love you both. I have loved you since the moment you arrived, and I have loved you through every version of yourselves you have offered me, including the versions that did not come. That love is in here somewhere. Probably in the pot roast recipe and the storm door that your brother finally fixed and the hanging planter that still goes up every May. It is not in the will, but it is real and it does not require you to have earned it. And I hope that when the dust settles, that is the part you hold on to. I was a teacher. I believed in lessons. This was the last one I had to give. Eugene Calloway. It is a Sunday morning in October and I am on my front porch with coffee. The neighborhood is doing its Sunday things, a dog being walked, a kid on a bike. Frank across the street raking leaves with the philosophical acceptance of a man who knows the leaves will simply fall again next week and has made his peace with that. The maple in my front yard is at its peak right now. That absurd October red that Michigan does better than anywhere. It happens every year and it is still unreasonable. I sit with my coffee and I look at that tree and I think about the fact that it has been doing this since before I owned this house, and it will keep doing it after I am gone. And there is something in that continuity that I find genuinely comforting rather than sad. My son will call at 9. He will ask about my scan results, which I told him came back clean, and he will say, "That is amazing, Dad. That is such great news." He will ask about the house in the way he has learned to ask about the house, carefully, as though approaching a subject that requires delicacy. I will tell him the maple is at peak color right now, and he should drive up sometime and see it. He might, and I would be glad if he did. My daughter is coming next Saturday with food and the yellow jacket she has started wearing now that it is cold, the one I told her once I liked, and which she has worn every visit since, which is the kind of small thing a person does when they are trying, and which I notice and which costs me something to receive with full openness. I receive it anyway. She is my daughter. She is, on Saturday afternoons in the kitchen, genuinely good company. She is not inheriting this house. She is inheriting Saturday afternoons if she wants them, which she seems to. That is what is available. That is what I have. The paperwork is in Stuart's file cabinet. The maple is at peak red. The coffee is good this morning, better than usual. One of those small and unreasonable pleasures that you notice more when you have spent some months being reminded that the ordinary days are the ones worth paying attention to. Frank waves from across the street. I raise my cup. He nods and goes back to his leaves. My students will ask me tomorrow why we study history, if it doesn't change anything. I have a new answer this year. We study history, I will tell them, because every choice you make is being recorded. Not by anyone in particular, not by any authority you need to fear, just by time. And time, I have found, is an excellent record keeper. It does not editorialize, it does not offer excuses. It simply notes what happened and what didn't, and lets the evidence speak. I have been a history teacher for 31 years. I taught my students that the past is the only honest document we have. I taught them that consequences are not punishment, they are information. I taught them to read carefully, think clearly, and understand that what a person does in a moment of low stakes tells you very little. But what they do when it costs them something, that is the sentence history actually writes down. I take the last of my coffee. I set the cup on the railing. The morning is doing what October mornings do in Michigan. Cool and specific and quietly luminous. The kind of morning that doesn't ask anything of you except to notice it. I notice it. The will is signed. The maple is red. My 32 students are waiting for me tomorrow morning, and they do not yet know that history is also about this, about ordinary men in ordinary houses making quiet decisions that no one will understand until after. I find that I am sitting here on this porch in this October light, at peace with that. Almost entirely at peace. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I will see you on the next. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, sitting on the porch on Birchwood Drive with my coffee going cold in my hand. I spent 31 years telling teenagers that history was not about dates or kings or battles. It was about choices. Every single time it came back to choices. And I believed that in my classroom, in the abstract, the way you believe things that haven't been tested against your own life yet. Then I had cancer. And my children made their choices. And I made mine. What I want to say is this. I am not a bitter man. I want to be clear about that because I think people hear a story like mine and they expect the teller to be hollowed out by it, carrying some permanent wound, waiting for an apology that will finally set things right. I am not waiting for anything. What happened in room 200 in Fort Sparrow Hospital changed me. But it did not break me, and I think that distinction matters. The nurse Paulette asked if there was someone she should call. That question cost me something in the moment. But it also gave me something. It gave me clarity, the kind you can only get when the noise of ordinary life stops and you are left with just the facts of your situation, unmediated and exact. 8 days, 6 weeks of notice, an empty chair. Those are just facts. Facts do not require anger. They require a response. The response I chose was quiet, and it was final. And it was grounded in something I have believed my entire professional life, that consequences are not cruelty. They are information. When I called Stewart and told him what I needed, I was not punishing my children. I was completing a circuit. I was making sure that the world I left behind reflected the world as it actually was, not the world as I had hoped it would be. There is a kind of integrity in that, a refusal to pretend. What I also want to say is that my daughter in her yellow jacket on those Saturday afternoons is real. My son fixing my storm door in July is real. The love in those moments is real, and it is not negated by the paperwork in Stewart's file. You can hold both things at the same time. You can love someone completely and still allow the truth to stand. That is not coldness. That is what it looks like when a person has decided to stop carrying the weight of other people's choices on their own back. My students will ask me why any of this matters. I will tell them, because the life you are building right now, today, in the small, unremarkable moments when nobody is watching and nothing is on the line, that is the structure you will be standing in when it counts. Strength is not something you locate in a crisis. It is something you have been building, slowly, from the quality of your ordinary days. The same goes for integrity. The same goes for showing up. You either practice it or you don't, and when the moment comes, you will know which one you chose. I am 63 years old. I had cancer. I came home in a rideshare. I changed my will and I made my peace, and I went back to teaching in September, and the maple out front is red again, and I drink better coffee than I used to. That is the whole of it, and I find, sitting here in the October light, that it is enough.